This is Avraham Shira. Welcome to Lighthouse Torah Project. I hope you've had a good week so far. The Shabbos is on the horizon, thank God. Can you imagine a week without Shabbos? That's enough to be happy right there, no matter what's going on in the world. We have Shabbos coming, and we only have to pray for all those people who don't know the greatness of Shabbos, because I think if people did know, they might change their mind about a lot of things in this world. I see that some familiar names: Yaakov ben Avraham. Welcome, Cindy and Esther, Miriam, Rhonda. It's always good to see your names there. Someday, God willing, you'll get out of the bus or the car, your limousine, in in Israel, and I'll shake your hand and welcome you home. We are going to do a special shiur that I kind of designed this week with Tisha beAv in mind. It's entitled 10 Types of Tears. Of course, really, Tisha beAv is not the only time we cry, of course. There's many types of tears in our lives. And of course, there are many types of tears in the Bible, in the Torah. The Talmud says, if the nations knew what they lost when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, they would mourn more than we do. So we shouldn't think that the Beit HaMikdash is just our temple. It's God's temple. And God is God of all the universe. And we mourn because of loss. The whole ritualization of mourning that we find in the Torah is designed to get us to sit on the floor, to feel loss, because our nature as people is that we don't want to feel lost. We want to look forward to the next great thing that's coming along. But if we don't feel lost, then we will not be able to appreciate the next great thing that Hashem sends into our lives. Not at the same level. That's one of the reasons why we have this concept of death. Because there didn't have to be death, There was no death before the primordial events in the garden. Death is a created thing. When you have an infinite, eternal God, why does there need to be death? Ask yourself. Why do people need to die? Why does anything need to die? And then, of course, we have the story, the snake, the poison, the seduction, the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. And all of that introduced the concept of death. After the fact, we understand that death enables us another aspect of free choice. But it obviously is much more than just free choice, because I think death is designed to help us appreciate life more. We could not know the greatness of being attached to the infinite being if we felt detached from the infinite being. So we had to have that moment of detachment, of feeling God is out there somewhere running in the garden. Ayeka, Adam, where are you? What happened? I give you one command and, down you go. Okay. We know there's a setup involved, and yet the setup is a divine thing itself. It is not God's cruelty, or he's changing the rules of the game, or he's bored, The setup is designed from the beginning to give us the opportunity to choose. And that means the opportunity to know good and evil and choose good. So, but when you're an infinite being, ask yourself, if you have that level of eternal life, how do you create the opposite of life? How do you remove yourself? How do you remove the light that never dies? Well, obviously Hashem is a very gifted designer, an engineer, and he understood if he put enough filters on his light, eventually the light would be hidden. And that creates the potential for choice between good and evil, and of course to experience life and death. And along with that comes along the process of mourning, avelut. And that's where we find ourselves tonight. Even though Shabbos is coming, and even though we have tremendous belief in our sages and the promises that this period of mourning will end, and Balam Mavik Lenetzach, that the period of death will also end. How it ends, when it ends, we have some ideas. Exactly, precisely, I don't know how important that is. Some say the end of the 6,000 years. Makes sense. Shabbos begins 6,000 and, 6,000. And then we begin this counting of the 7,000s of years, which is Shabbos, which is Mein Olam Haba, which is, of course, the aspect of above time and above life and death. My camera is off. Oh, what happened? Let's try a different port. Nothing. Well, how do you like that? Something new every day. So we have a camera. I have another camera, which is the computer's camera. It's pretty rough. How would does any of you know how I would transfer? I unplugged the camera that stopped working. It was working. I guess it got tired, put in his good years. Where the USB port went, I've never heard of that actually happening, but why not? I have another camera here. This is the backup picture. It's late in the game. We've got to have somebody come in, strike out the side. But will that be accomplished? No. It looks like the port itself is not doing its job. Well, guess what? We have other ports. Come over to this side of the computer. This is fun. This is like 6th grade, when they give you all the toys to play with. And maybe that was a little younger. Oh, it made a noise. The register being plugged in. I know some of you are more technically accomplished than I am, but nothing's happening. But no camera. Okay. So the question I have is, do you really need to see me tonight Start video. I can push that again. What happened? Well, that's the computer camera. Maybe I look a few years older. That's okay. I'll get over that. But we're back. Death comes in many forms, even in the form of a camera. Now, so we're in mourning. The thing about mourning is, Alayhi Shalom, my mom, we lost her about 4 years ago, and that was pretty intense. That was the first real loss since my grandfather in 1975 when I was a kid. And I could feel through the whole Shiva period this urge to jump, this urge to move out of that space of mourning. Not because anything was amiss with my relationship with my mother. It was just, sitting there on the floor for day after day after day after day. It became a bit much. All right. But the idea of mourning is a Torah imposed contemplation. Torah imposed. We are not going to escape. Now, as a therapist, I've faced many clients where I felt that they had really missed some of the mourning that they needed to do in their life for people they loved or even people they didn't love. Because you can mourn somebody you didn't love, because after they die, you might actually discover that you do love them, some aspect of them at least. And I learned that if we skip mourning, guess what happens? We have to do it later. It comes creeping up 20, 30 years later when you're middle-aged, and you suddenly realize that I feel disconnected from other people's loss. And I feel disconnected even from my own loss. And so mourning is actually an amazing gift of the rabbis that forces us to develop the vessels, the muscles of experiencing loss, because life has loss. I remember, sorry to laugh. I remember when we found one of our puppies, in the road, like most kids do. I okay, that's it. No more dogs for me. I'm not going to go through this again. I love this dog. He got run over. I'm not doing this again. And that's what I did. And of course, until I got married and lived in Israel, and on a mountain that faced, some long lost cousins that seemed to have it in for us. So we had more of good reasons to own a dog. But the Torah imposed loss forces us to feel things we don't want to feel, but that's good for us. It makes us stronger, makes us more compassionate, more empathetic. And those are things we need. We need for the living. We need for everyday life. And not just if you're a therapist, obviously. To be a good mother, a good husband, and a good grandson. You have to be able to feel loss. The beauty is, of course, that you start to appreciate life more. The little things. The Beit HaMikdash is about 20 minutes down the road, or at least in its cyber psychic space. Unbuilt as of yet, but the lights are there. The structure is already given. You can go to the Kotel every day of the year and not feel the loss, because we have the Kotel. The Kotel is sad. The Kotel is the wall, the Wailing Wall. It's the place we go to mourn. Now, there's a lot of happy things that happen there, weddings and bar mitzvahs and reunions, and probably a lot of selfies, nowadays. But it is really that place. And God gave us one wall this is enough for you now to remember what you had. But when you compare that wall to the glory of the descriptions of the Beit HaMikdash, not to mention paintings and renderings that have been done in our generation, computer generated and otherwise, it's pretty sad what the Kotel is compared to the Beit HaMikdash. You know, a place where the Shekhinah never moved for 410 years during the first temple. You don't think you felt differently when you walked in that place? Of course you did. So now we mourn the loss of something we never had. This is a deep thing. Because it's one thing to mourn the loss of someone you loved, but to mourn something I never had? I'm writing this down. Because when we mourn something that we never had, it's an effort of imagination. We're engaging parts of our mind and our soul that we don't often use. Now, again, forgive me for referring back to therapy as a metaphoric model, but this is also something that we see quite often in our generation, where people have to mourn the parents they never had, either because the parents were physically absent or emotionally or mentally absent. That's a painful thing too. Mourning something I never had, that is so strange. The rabbis say, no, sit on the floor, eat your egg, and think about it. Think about it and think about it. I'll be honest with you, on Tisha beAv, I'll spend some of the time when I can't pray. I get too tired, I get too weak from fasting. I'm not a very good faster. I'll put on Holocaust movies, because for me, the Chorban Habayit in our generation was the Holocaust. And the Holocaust is probably, one of the greatest single human destructions ever. Of course, the whole World War II was. But what are we mourning when we're mourning a temple? Bricks, rocks, stones, boards, pillars? No. Those things can be replaced pretty quickly. We're mourning the loss of our spiritual selves, our divine selves, our godly connection, and of course, all the lives that went with that destruction. The rabbis say that after the destruction, blood ran ankle deep from Har HaBayit down into the Kidron. Now, is this like another rabbinical exaggeration, do you think? I don't think so. I think it was very possible. I think the Babylonians were certainly capable. And if you walk around the old city and you look at the slopes and you look at all the channels in the rocks and the way things gather up into the valleys, and then you imagine 10,000 Jews being slaughtered in one spot. It's not so hard. Okay. So what I thought was, let's look at crying, weeping, mourning, because crying and weeping are just the physical expression of that process of mourning. And I came up with a list of 10 types of tears from my own experience and from that of others, whether it's from people that I've known or from books. And then, of course, Hashem sent the idea, well, what about all the tears in the Torah? Are there 10 types of tears in the Torah? So I made a list. I'm going to share that with you now. And then we're going to talk about the different types of tears from the Torah. And we'll connect them to some more everyday, common, modern renditions of that. Okay. So the first tears that came to mind was Leah Imenu. The rabbi said that her eyes were soft, rakot, from mourning the fact that she knew she was destined to marry Esav, the Rasha. That she and her sister were scheduled, in the Shadchan's office, Rachel, Leah, Jacob, Esav. Oh yeah, that's a nice match. Take care of one family and a go. And one has red hair. Okay, we'll work with that. I read somewhere once that redheads should marry redheads, It's like saying Moroccans should marry Moroccans. What can I tell you? Leah, we're told that she wept so much at the thought of marrying this guy that her eyes started to soften, started to lose their focus, perhaps. That's the type of mourning. That's a type of, well, I'm not sure what we would say. Let me turn on the chat here, or you could just unmute yourselves and we could talk. Because I think this is the kind of interactive type of material that's good for us. How would you categorize those tears of Leah Imenu? Tears of fear from marrying the guy, or the sense of foreboding, which of course is part of fear, or were they tears of disgust, tears of rejection? She could have been angry at God. I mean, she's at Tzedekis, obviously, so we got to be real careful about projecting our issues on tzaddikim. Cindy writes, frustration, despondency. I like that. That sounds better than angry at God for fixing me up with Esav. But in the end, she didn't marry Esav. Some falter for that. They said she could have turned him into a bigger tzaddik than Yaakov Avinu. But then that would have changed the whole Bible and it would have messed up the story, I think she was sad for feeling overlooked. Very nice. Because she didn't know that her sister was going to give her the signs. That's a good question, that you're kind of alluding to, Cindy, because when did Rachel actually tell her, I'm going to give you the signs, don't worry. Don't worry. You're going to marry Jacob. Did she tell her a week before, 2 days, 5 minutes? When did that dramatic moment in history go down? It'd be very interesting to know. You would think, and when did Rachel Imenu get the idea? I'm going to give my sister Jacob. I can't, she's suffering too much. She's crying all the time for Esav. I can deal with Esav. We'll whip him into shape. I'm not sure if she had that thought either. Rachel was always going to share that. I'm not doubting that either, but I'm wondering just when she told Leah. Because if she had told her weeks or months before, maybe she wouldn't have cried so much. She would say, wow, my sister, she's coming through. I'm not going to marry Esav. I don't need to weep and cry about him. So maybe we'll never know, but it's an interesting question. Or we have to do some, check Rabbi Google and see if we can find any answers from any of the great ones in the past. I'm sure there must be some commentary on this. Let me write that down for a note. It's something to look up next week. They say in the Israeli army, if you don't write it down, you forget it. So I believe them. All right. So that's one case of tears, which are from a very righteous person, a self-sacrificing person who clearly, she lived in the house of her father until they moved, and she knew what her father was: a sorcerer, a swindler, a magician. And we're not talking about Las Vegas style magician. We're talking about people that curse people for a living, like Bilam. And she dealt with that. So these people were clearly on another plane of endurance and the ability to endure suffering and disappointment and akzava in Hebrew. Like akzava is kind of like abandonment, but it's also like giving up, but they didn't give up. Okay, so that's one type of tear, Leah's tears. The next one I wrote down, Hannah Hanaviyah. She wept a long time to have a son like Shmuel and Navi. She had a tzara. A second wife is very interesting. They're called a tzara, which is a good word for it. Tsar, Lashon, difficulty, suffering. Halachically, that's what the second wife is called. Now, I'm not sure who Elkanah, her husband, married first, her or Penina. But Penina had a bunch of sons and children. I don't know if they were all sons. And she had a bunch of children, and we're told that Hannah had no children. Here it is again. But the Midrash tells us that Penina would egg, Hannah. Why don't you pray? Why don't you pray? What's your problem? Pray more. You don't pray enough for God to give you a child. Maybe there's a special child going to be born through you. Now, in our generation, we have an example that's a little similar. A woman, a fervent woman, went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe back in the 60s or 70s, when the Rebbe was very strong and standing on his feet 10 hours a day on Sundays, giving out dollars and blessings. And she, in her obvious innocence, purity of heart, she said, "Rebbe, bless me to have a son like you." It's a nice line, right? How do you feel that? You're a shortstop. How do you feel that hard liner up the middle? So the Rebbe says, I don't know if he had a cup there on his table. I'm not sure he did, but at least I know he held out his hand if he wasn't holding a cup, and he said, or he went like this, seeing my hand, "Are you willing to cry a cup of tears like this to have a son like me?" Of course, the implication is that the Rebbe's mother did. And so there is a case that if you want to have special children, you have to put in more effort. Of course, all our children are special, and each in their own ways. But to have a child like the Babachur Rebbe, who was a genius from the age, from 3 years old, 5 years old. That's special, Sheva special, right? Okay, so there we have Hannah's tears seem to be just pure motherly longing, tears of motherly longing, which is very understandable, even for men, who don't experience that longing, of course, the same way that women do, although men do feel the absence of having children. Someone once wrote the Lubavitch Rebbe a letter complaining he had all these kids and he didn't have enough money to feed them properly. Would the Rebbe please bless him for Parnassa, for more money? And the Rebbe right back, you're complaining about Parnassa, you have 10 kids? I have no kids. He told him, this was back in the 50s, that letter. The Rebbe felt the absence of not having children, of course. But he understood it was part of his role because he was going to be a father to hundreds of thousands. Okay, so Hannah's tears seem to be on a very righteous level and understandable, and tears that we can certainly feel mercy, pity for such a situation. The next one on my list, now, by the way, when I wrote these down, I had in mind that there is a gradation of these things. And when we come to my English explanation of them in modern language, I tried to start from the lowest level of motivation for crying and move to the highest level to give some sort of span of structure of a scale between the highest levels of why we would cry and mourn and the lower levels. Okay, we'll get there. The next type of tears, the tears that the angels, the Midrash tells us that the angels wept into Yitzhak Avinu's eyes when he was on the Akedah. Well, that's a special kind of tear. They say, and the rabbis say that that's what weakened Yitzhak Avinu's eyesight. Now, where do you go with that? Angel tears. Why were they crying over Yitzhak? Angels are notoriously detached. They have a job to do. They do it well. Goodbye. Or are they? Maybe they feel what we don't feel. Maybe they have that capacity. And we have to also remember that angels are completely attached to God's speech and his mind. So it's not like they're independent entities, which means they have this power to channel very high level thoughts and feelings. So, the Torah doesn't report that Avraham Avinu wept as he went to do the Akedah. He was steeling himself. He was strengthening, empowering himself to go through this ordeal. That's what we understand from the Torah telling us that it took 3 days to get there. It was 3 days he was preparing himself to do this most absurd act. The son that you prayed for 100 years, son finally comes in a completely miraculous manner, and then you're going to sacrifice him? What kind of God is that? What kind of prophet is that? It completely warps the mind's normal logical thinking. But Yitzhak Avinu was 37 years old when he went to the Akedah. He was fully grown, aware, sentient being. He knew what he was doing. Maybe some of you have an insight, but it seems to me that the angels wept over Yitzhak because they realized how great a human being could be, greater than them. The angel doesn't have free choice. The angel doesn't measure life the way we do. The angel doesn't have a wife and kids at home like Avraham Avinu did. And the angels were suddenly confronted with the whole reason why God created man, even though the angels said not to do it because he was going to sin, because they saw the greatness, the potential for greatness, the reality of it in Yitzhak Avinu's self-sacrifice for doing God's will. Angels are constantly doing God's will. That's all they do. They don't play cards on Sunday afternoon. So perhaps the angels wept from seeing such greatness. Yirmiyahu Navi was the prophet chosen chiefly for the job of reporting to the Jewish people for 40 years. 40 years is a long time, folks, to walk around Jerusalem telling people the destruction is coming. The destruction's coming. You know, nowadays, you get every once in a while you get these rabbis that stand up and say, "Oh, the end is coming," and of course you get Christians and other denominations that are always preaching the doom, because doom sells. I hate to say it. People like fear. They actually don't like fear, but they're very. It's an addictive force. Fear is another thing that has fallen in this world. True awe of God is not fallen, and true awe of God does not have room for selfishness and fear for my own little loaf of bread in my own little house, in my car, in my family. Right? True fear is a divine thing. But Yirmiyahu, he wasn't, he was preaching doom, but it wasn't his choice. He was told after he was born that you were sanctified in the womb. I chose you for this job. All this is in the beginning of the Sefer. Because God knew it was not going to be a happy job. It was not going to be pleasant. And in the end, they murdered him. And his blood was boiling in the floor of the Beit HaMikdash. The Romans came and said, "Stop the boiling. Why is it boiling?" They told him, "Well, there was a prophet killed here." Why'd they kill him? Who killed him? The Romans. They said, well, they brought forward some people that I guess they were forced to, and the Romans killed them on the spot. Can you imagine? That it took a non-Jewish Roman soldier, actually, I'm sorry, that was the second temple. And that would have been Roman soldiers. The first temple was Iraqi, Saddam Hussein's early forces. I guess back then they were called Babylonians. Sorry. Now, so Yirmiyahu's tears where that's even, think about this. There's a guy, he knows the truth. He's not inventing. Prophets do not invent. You cannot. And he knows what's going to happen, and he sees the people are not listening year after year after year, and nobody's really, a few people I'm sure listen and did tshuva, the part of the Yemenite Jewry, their history is that they believed the prophet and they said, we're out of here, because they saw that people were not going to listen. Can you imagine? We're going to go down to the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. There's oil down there. We'll find it someday. I'm sure they hope to. and they split the Holy Land. They said, we're not going to wait here for the destruction and to see our brothers slaughtered on the slopes of Jerusalem. And that's why the Yemenites left, and they survived, and they lived well. And they didn't go off to chains to Babylon or to Rome. But look at the the psychological stress that you have this job and you have to do it, and God's forcing you to do it, and nobody wants to hear you, and they want to kill you. And you do have pity for them, even though they're not interested in what God says. We just want to have a good time. It's the end of days. It's okay, the temple will be destroyed, whatever. So those kind of tears that Yirmiyahu and Navi cried, beyond us, beyond the experience of the loss, the imminent loss that was 40 years of imminence, right? They didn't know when it was going to happen exactly. And to see your brothers go down the path of denial, pure, straight up denial. We don't care. We're not interested. And you better shut up. So that's another level of tears, of mourning that's directly connected, obviously, to Tisha B'Av. Well, there's other tears, folks. Have we had enough yet? Maybe we better split this over 2 weeks. That music that the Lighthouse is playing, I don't know, that's pretty heavy duty. I guess it's the week for that. Oh, but we have more, folks. We have the tears for tzaddikim in general, the loss of the righteous, like Yirmiyahu. The 10 martyrs, of course, are the symbols of that. The 10 martyrs, of course, the most famous Rabbi Akiva, burned alive. There were many others, 9 others that were, of course, counted in that group. They all weren't killed at the same time, but they're grouped together because they were all Tanaim, extremely holy, righteous, miraculous teachers. And this is a tremendous loss. In Pirkei Avot, there's a whole section that tells us what was lost when each of those great rabbis died. I wish I could quote it for you by heart. I don't have it here exactly in front of me at the moment, but they say when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was killed or died, humility was lost, and when Rabbi Akiva died, the kavod of the Torah was lost, and when I think I'm going to stop there. Anyways, so that's another type of tears, the loss of our great masters who sacrificed themselves for the Torah. Okay, well, we can get a little more close to home. Personally, we have King David weeping for Avshalom, a very famous scene in Sefer Malachim, where Avshalom died after he rebelled against his father after he tried to steal the kingship from his brother Solomon, Shlomo, after he organized a revolution that failed, and he was on the run. The famous story is his hair got hung up in a tree. It was part of the symbol of his vanity. Obviously, he used to cut his hair once a year in the marketplace in Jerusalem because he had such long, thick hair. You know, one of these Woodstock kind of haircuts. You know. And they say it would weigh, like, I think, I don't know the biblical weights, but it would weigh something like a kilo, which is a lot of hair. Once a year, he would cut his hair in public to show people. I don't know if he sold it or maybe they made wigs. I don't know. But Avshalom was not the kind of son that you really like to have around. You know, he's looking to undermine you everywhere, every turn you make. King David already suffered enough. And yet King David still wept and wept and wept for his son. And the rabbis teach that every cry that King David cried for Avshalom, it pulled Avshalom out of a deeper level of Gehinnom and brought him back to a more sustainable, shall we say, place in the upper worlds. So there you see the tears of the righteous have the power to pull people out of hell. Well, that's a good thing. So we shouldn't, you know, obviously we don't want to need that service. But it is an example that the Torah gives us. A father's love for his son goes beyond the son's behavior. And such a loss, you know, King David refused to eat. He refused to be comforted. And that's for a son that tried to throw him out of office, you know. We're not talking about whatever. The Baal Shem Tov is quoted as saying, Halavai, I love the tzaddikim as much as God loves the Rashaim. Now, it's hard for us to get our head around that idea. God loves Rashaim. But of course, God sees a much bigger picture of the person and not just all his bad choices. Okay. King David also wept for Yonatan, who was his best friend, the son of Shaul, his father-in-law, the previous king. And King David wrote a beautiful song. It's still quoted today all over the world. How the mighty have fallen. It's beautiful in any language, and it speaks of David's loss of his friend, his brother-in-law, Yonatan. And that's another type of loss. A friend, but a really good friend. A friend who was with you at every turn. Okay. There's a few more tears here that will lighten up the matter. The tears of the Meraglim, the tears that the Meraglim caused, right? The reason that Tisha B'Av is Tisha B'Av, because the first Tisha B'Av was when the Meraglim came back from spying on the land and the giants, etc., in Eretz Israel, and they cried. Hashem calls them vain tears. Shav, Dimo, Shav. These tears that were vain were because they were just self-interestly motivated. And the Meraglim gave a bad report and broke the people's hearts about going into the land. Now, you think about it for a minute. Think about it. They all knew the basic storyline. God is taking us out of Egypt to take us to the Holy Land to get the Torah. They knew that something big was coming. And the land itself, the land of milk and honey and all this dramatic language, they'd gone through hell as Pharaoh's private workforce. And then this miraculous redemption occurred, and all these miracles happened. And then these guys came along and broke their hearts and broke their confidence with their reports. And they wept, and they caused the people to weep. Oh, the Yankees lost. Oh, I still, I just, I feel sorry for that level of loss. When people can weep about a sporting event, when, there's so much happening in the world. So that's another type of tears. The Meraglim, the spies' tears, I call them, but they really were the people themselves. They were influenced by the spies. And then there's the crying out, of course, of the Avraham and a few of their friends, because they wanted to go back to Egypt, to the land of watermelons and, fried goat, lamb stew, whatever they had. They didn't like it out in the desert, even though they had man, they had lechem min hashamayim, they had the holy bread, the lechem abirim, it's called the bread of the angels. Sorry, we like our food very, very dense and and sweet. And that was another type of weeping, a very low level of weeping. Weeping for our lost desires, tavot. Weeping for my lost, we lose things sometimes. It can be traumatic. I remember being 10 years old and losing my first $10 bill. That was like, wow, that was in 1970. Okay, you got it. That's 51 years ago. I remember to this day, losing that $10 bill was like the biggest thing I ever had. I wept, so I cried over there at, what was the name of that store? One of those old time department stores, That was before Walmart even. So, in the ancient days, they used to count the money by hand. That kind of crying is a child's crying. Losing my little desire, my little loss. Okay, a child we could understand, but grown people that have just witnesses the greatest event in the history of humanity, the Exodus from Egypt, and now they're weeping over watermelons. Come on. Okay, how we doing? Well, we still have some time. So I tried to categorize these types of tears that we've been talking about. And I also categorized them according to the 5 levels of the soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida, from the lowest animal soul to the highest divine soul. And I want to use a lot of time. I'm just going to read through my notes because I think it's worthwhile. So I listed, and you can argue or disagree too. Is evil part of God? Miriam writes. This is a question that people ask in many forms always. Evil is the absence of God's light. God is a very, very good technician, and he can show up and he can leave, and he can reveal himself and he can hide, and he can shine his light on the universe and send everybody to the seventh heaven, and he can turn his back and it's darker than hell. Well, Woolworths, Yaakov. We had a Woolworths, but I think this was a Kmart. I'm not sure. I think so. Anyways, God has this flexibility. We don't even give him credit for being more flexible than we are. It's absurd, but he is. And so these tears, all these levels of tears, they really speak about our attachments and losing our attachments. But your question about evil part of God, so you cannot attribute evil to God in the way that people do it, because when you learn the Kabbalah and the structure of the worlds, there are many, many realms where evil cannot even touch. Evil essentially only rises up into the level of Bria, to the left brain of Bria, is where the sin, because Adam and Eve sinned in the world of Atzilut, which is the complete revelation of God. His traits are shining everywhere. There's no body to be weighed down by. There's no hunger. That's what the garden was like. They were in a garden of God's light. Okay. When they fell, the rabbis of the Kabbalah explained to us how the fall happened, layer by layer by layer. And it only fell into the world of Bria. The holiness was taken down from the traits into the level of thought. And so the chief damage that we're here to fix, by the way, is in the left brain of Ima Ila'ah, the upper mother, the left brain being the mathematic language processor. Okay? So when we understand that, from there down, from that gives us this ability to think not well, say it that way, right? The fall enables us to think things that are not true, the things that are false, and project thoughts that aren't real. But from there down, evil has a place. So when we say, is God, evil part of God? Not in the way, it depends on where you're talking about. Is it the first floor of the building, or is it the top of the building? The top of the building, no way. There's no evil above Ima of Bria. But of course, we have to study these things and know these levels to be able to pinpoint it. However, does that mean that God is divorced completely from evil? No. Rabbi Nachman teaches that every single evil person or thing in this world has to have a spark of God in it to exist. That's its inner soul. But the inner soul can be completely kidnapped and hijacked by evil forces until the godly spark is just okay. The only way that that spark will be freed is by the death of the thing that's holding it. That's one level. So I hope that begins to answer your question. It's a very important question, Miriam, but it's one that it can make us think things that we don't need to. God is all good. Know that. And we see in life that even bad things turn good, on a great scale, on a tiny scale. We have to hold on to that idea. Okay. Now, So I made my list, disagree, write in your answer, whatever you think. The first level I said is the self-pity tears. Poor me. Oh, look at me. Oh, don't I have it bad? Those types of tears, again, they're like childlike. But when they happen to a child, we understand because the child is not developed yet to even be able to comprehend. However, adults, we expect more. Crying for being lonely. That's not the same as self-pity. Being lonely is a real existential state. It's not a happy state. We are social beings. We need people. But some people, I have friends that are like very much to be alone. They're isolationists anyways. But, I'm not sure how much in touch they are with the loneliness or not. It's not my business. But tears for loneliness does happen. People sit in their in their room and feel lonely and cry. It's very lonely world for a lot of people, especially people who don't have a significant other in their life. Okay, coming down the list, then I wrote the tears for unrealized illusions, tears for dreams that never happened, tears for even reasons I don't even know why I'm crying. I'm just crying. I watched you can hear a movie, you watch a movie or hear a song and cry and not know, well, why am I crying? Because of that song. Okay, obviously it's connected somewhere in your past, but they're not self-pity tears, but they're certainly not the highest level. That my dream didn't come true. Well, maybe it's good my dream didn't come true. But people will weep about such things. That type of loss. Now, there's another level that I think is a very noble level to reach. And these are the tears that we cry because we cannot cry. Right? It sounds like a paradox. But when we're in touch with our hearts and our hearts feel hard, like that rock you get in the morning when you have to deal with things you don't want to deal with, and then there can be this gift from God where you actually cry about not being able to cry. And that's a beautiful thing, but that's a gift. That is not something that we can generate necessarily because I feel sorry for myself again. But it is a prayer that we can cry that God open our heart of stone. And it just occurs to me the word Avel, the mourner, is Aleph, Bet, Lamed. What word is that when you read it backwards? Liba. That's interesting, Ron. I'm not sure how you derive that. It's possible. But Avel, Aleph, Bet, Lamed is spelled, you read it backwards, it's Lamed, Bet, Aleph, Liba, which is Aramaic for heart. The Aleph at the end. Lev, Liba. So it's all connected to the heart. This Avelut, this mourning for our great temple, our great Shekhinah. Okay. Then there's tears for others because of their pain. We feel their pain. It makes us cry. That's a good thing. Now there's tears for others I do not know. People that you never met. People that you hear about on the news. That happens. That's a higher level of empathy when you can cry for people you don't even know. But we have to check ourselves because sometimes we can be crying for something we're not sure about. Or we're crying for one we think is one thing and it's not that, it's something else. And one way of translating it, the gates of tears are never locked. So the Rabbi of Kotsk, in his classic way, he says, he asks a kushya, a question. Wait a minute. Think about it. If the gates of tears are never closed, why do you need gates? Just let them on in. Everybody that cries, come on in. Why do we need gates? I was just going to say, why do we need Bill Gates? But I don't know if that's going to go over too good. Ay, ay, ay. Anybody who professes eugenics is not a friend of the Jews. Sorry. The Rebbe of Kotsk answers the gates. There are gates on the gates of tears because for people who don't know why they cry. They cry, they well up with tears, but they're not in touch enough to know why. And for those people, when they pray, their prayers might not just slip in. Now, of course, a lot of people will cry and say, I don't, why are you crying? I don't know. It's also a gift to be able just to know why we feel what we feel. To know ourselves that well. Okay, some other higher level tears I felt, the lost, crying or weeping for lost service of God, the Torah we could have learned, the prayers we could have prayed, the mitzvot we could have done that we didn't do. That's a high level of crying, of weeping for those things. Then there's of course, you can also cry for not helping other people when you could have. That's a hard one, you know. Because sometimes a certain mitzvah will come to you that nobody else can do, and if you don't do it, something is gone, something is lost. Of course, and then the end of this scale, tears for the house itself, for the Beit HaMikdash, that this great structure was destroyed by people who have no respect for the God of Israel. At least they didn't then. You know, if I was a Roman soldier and they said, we're going to destroy the Beit HaMikdash, I says, I ain't going. You know, I'm staying on the boat. I'll stay right here in Caesarea and fish. You know, why would you want to destroy God's house? Even if you're the most thick-headed, you know, idol worshiping person, you would just think, this doesn't sound like a good thing to do. I knew people that wanted to attack a church. I said, are you crazy? First of all, if an Orthodox Jew does anything like that, it becomes an international event for nothing. Yeah, but they shouldn't have statues of JC in Jerusalem. I said, yeah, you're right, they shouldn't. But if you go tear down or set the church on fire, you're going to create international hatred of Jews. Okay. Now, an even higher level than weeping for God's house is weeping for God's reputation, that people, I mean, I remember the first time as a religious Jew, I heard someone say the GD word, and I felt, it was like I got punched in the stomach, like right in the solar plexus. To this day, I can feel it. To curse God's name. And that's his reputation. And to hear the garbage that people speak about God is just horrible. And the things people write on the internet, unbelievable. You know, it's one thing if you've studied for 20 years and then you have an opinion, okay, but people just throwing out things that they say about Jews and Judaism and God, like, please. The Jerusalem Post, the Great Jerusalem Post, put out an article recently that said that the true enemy of the Jewish state is not the Arabs and it's not the Iranians, it's the Haredim, this ultra Orthodox. Whoever wrote that article is in trouble spiritually, believe me. And the editor that allowed it, he's also in trouble. But this is our world, and we have to live with it, and we have to still embrace it, even with all that kind of ridiculous things. So weeping for God's reputation is a real thing. Okay, and that goes along, of course, when people shame the Torah, make fun of the Torah, say things about the Torah. They have no clue what Rashi says about anything, much less the thousands of years of commentators that elucidate all the contradictions and show us how they're really just there to teach us something deeper that we don't know is there. Then, of course, there's weeping for the Jewish people in general in exile, and all the Jews that don't even know what they're missing. And as I said earlier, the tears for the martyrs like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol. These... Okay. So I hope that put you all in a great mood for Shabbos. I felt it was my duty, to share these things because Hashem sends me these things, and I, this is what we have to do. But, remember, loss is only a state, a temporary state. The pain will go. Whether your kid losing your first $10 bill, or God forbid you lose someone you love dearly, the pain is real, and it's most supposed to be real, and we have to feel it. And if we can just feel the loss of the Beit HaMikdash a little bit, that guarantees you part of its return, and to be part of that someday. Whether it's in this Gilgul or another, we don't know when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, but those details are not important to us right now. What's important to us is that we feel the loss, and we have to know that is going to bring it back. And let's see how we're doing it. 2:12. Napoleon, Mr. Napoleon, the one and only, was passing through a town with his armies in France, and he saw Jews sitting on the floor, on the ground, outside the synagogue. And he said, "What are they sitting on the floor for?" And one of his soldiers said, "They're mourning their temple, their lost temple in Jerusalem." And Napoleon stopped, he had that little three-pointed hat probably. And he said, if these people are, and he said, when did that happen? He said, thousands of years ago. And he said, and they're still mourning a temple that was destroyed back then, I guess it was 1800 years ago. They're still mourning. He said, if these people are still mourning 1800 years later for that temple, then that temple is going to be rebuilt. And that's what Napoleon said. So, wisdom can come from many places. We should never discount the source until we first hear what's being said. Okay, now I had a little exercise. It's a little late. I'm going to redo the exercise and suggest that you do it on your own. I don't know if we have time. It's really up to Reb Michael. But the exercise is like this. I would ask you first, which of the tears from the Bible do you associate with or identify with the most? Leah's tears, David's tears, Yirmiyahu's tears, any of these characters, or maybe a character that you know of that I didn't bring. So that's one question that's worth answering and discussing and exploring. And why? we feel aligned or connected to that person from our past. Of course, and then the other list that we went through, which is a little less specific. Where am I on this list? Am I still crying for my lost this or that or the other of the material world? Or am I weeping for somebody that I lost years ago because I didn't mourn them properly when they were lost? Or am I weeping because I saw a picture of the Beit HaMikdash and it was so beautiful and I can't imagine go up on Rabbi today. I don't feel holiness up there. I feel desolation. I went up once and I won't go again. I didn't feel like it was a spiritual high to go up on Rabbi. I felt desolation, the absence of what's supposed to be there. And or do your tears come when you think of, Rabbi Akiva burned alive? So that's another useful discussion question. If somebody has something they want to add right now in the next minute or two, that's fine. We can talk about it a little bit. You open your mics, and if you have something like that you want to share. I'm certain that I've wept for all these levels, the highest and the lowest. There's, of course, we can weep for shame. We can weep from being embarrassed. We can weep. The Zohar says a beautiful thing, that if a person is angry, so angry that he cries, that's a good sign that he's sweetened the dinim that caused him the anger in the first place. That is an important thing, especially if people have anger issues. If I get angry, okay, you get angry sometimes. If I can get to the point of weeping from my anger, that's going to fix it. That's going to release the din, the judgment, the constriction, the pain. So that's another type of tear, the tears that come from rage.
I would like to suggest something also. Sometimes I've been in a situation where really I should have cried, but I kind of laughed. So it's kind of the opposite of tears, but it's like a nervous tear, if it's possible to call it that.
Yeah. So laughter is a wonderful defense mechanism, I guess, if you don't mind the psychology term, because first of all, it's not easy to cry, certainly not in public. It's not even easy alone in your room. And also, it's just a knee-jerk reaction to laugh because something that seems so absurd. But there is the tears that lead to joy. I should have had that on the list too. I'm going to write that down. And so tears of joy are usually, they come when something amazing happens, really amazing. Or tears when you have a reunion. I used to go to the airport. I used to take people to the airport years ago. It was one of my little side jobs. And I would just sit in the lobby there at Ben Gurion Airport and watch these reunions. My God, it's like, it's better than TV, You see these families reuniting, people coming back from outside the land, and they have family members there to greet them. It's wonderful. There are those types of tears of joy too. Then
there's also bittersweet.
Yeah. Which?
Bittersweet tears, like when they're saying goodbye at the airport, the opposite.
That's true. That's true. Bittersweet. Yeah, we never know when we're gonna Well, I remember saying goodbye to my grandmother in the States. I didn't realize it was going to be the last time. So, but those are good points, Rhonda. Thank you.
Rav Shira, I have a question, please.
Sure.
It's not exactly on this topic, but it's about Tisha beAv. I'm driving. I hope I don't lose the call. I wanted to ask why we don't learn Torah on Shabbat afternoon, that it's approaching Tisha beAv. So what do you do if you normally read like some of the Torah on the Shabbat afternoon? Are you not supposed to this weekend?
You're talking Shabbos afternoon, Erev Tisha B'Av. You're asking why we don't learn what?
Why you don't study Torah on the afternoon?
Well, generally, Erev Tisha B'Av is not a time of studying Torah.
Okay.
It's a time of preparation. We do Suda Mafseket, we sit on the floor. If you're really into it, you take some ashes, put them on your forehead. You know, it's a time of preparation.
So when does that
review,
start?
It's a time, the Torah learning we do then is to review the laws of Tisha B'Av. 5 types of affliction, things we don't do, things that aren't fitting. All of that is Torah learning. So I don't think it's dafka connected to Shabbat. Now, Tisha B'Av afternoon, after midday, people will stop sitting on the floor or on the low, carpet or something, and they will learn other Torah. But we're supposed to generally learn Torah that's connected to mourning, like Eicha. I like to learn Sefer Yov, Sefer Job. It's one of the popular misery stories in history of suffering. And when I say I like to learn it, it's not exactly your pleasurable reading, but it is astounding type of book. When you read it in the big picture, you see when you know the Zohar on Yov, and it completely opens up the book. And who was Job? Job was the great nephew of Avraham Avinu to his brother Nahor. And Job was a massive billionaire of his time. And he was also involved with Pharaoh, and he had business dealings all across the Middle East. And Pharaoh called him in for a war conference. And Job gave a bad advice to Pharaoh. He said, well, you got a Jewish problem, just put them to work and take their goods. Enslave them. God said, oh yeah, you're going to tell Pharaoh to enslave my kids? I'll show you what that's like. And Job lost everything, of course. But we do learn at the end of the Sefer that he gets everything back in double. God is kind and merciful to him after he suffered. And that story, some people will contradict it. There's opinions in the Talmud that it was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Other people say that it was never happened. So we have to have a very broad lens when we look at these things. But that's a book we learn on Tisha B'Av, because it does involve these difficult issues. Like I said, usually I can't learn. I have a hard time reading when I'm like just not eating or drinking and for a long time. In the beginning, it's okay, but so sometimes I'll just look at any of these. You look at a 5-minute movie of the Holocaust, that'll make you cry right there. But the idea, the work is to open the heart. The work is to feel the pain and allow ourselves that and be with it, because it will strengthen us to be better Jews and to help the rest of the world. Because running from our feelings, running from our feelings is already, it's an international pastime that we're, that we get swept up into very easily. I'm afraid that's part of why the smartphone is not so smart. Okay. But think about these questions. Try to answer them for yourselves. If you want to write me about it, that's great. You can write me at Rabbi Avraham Shira at Gmail. And we will take what they call in Israel the Chofish HaGadol, the great holiday, the great summer vacation in English, I guess, is coming up after Tisha B'Av, so we'll have 3 weeks off. Then we'll be back in Elul, as I said earlier. But like I said, just make sure you have speed dial for your travel agent to get those tickets to Israel when you can. I know it's not easy. I have friends that are like, aren't you making, they said they want to make Aliyah, they're lined up to make Aliyah, and yet they're hearing more and more news reports about the Israeli government and the vaccination programs and all these things. And they're like, well, I don't want to go to Israel. The government's harder than the American government. So these are parts of the tests and the trials of the time, because Eretz Israel is another level altogether. And life here is harder, but it's better. It's the kind of hard that makes you stronger, and God squeezes you to make you closer to him. So I'm willing. Go on and squeeze. God's been squeezing 30 years already. So, but we'll look for you again. I remember when I discovered that after many years of keeping Shabbat, that it is not okay if I'm not a convert. I cried so much, so sadly for weeks. Wow, sorry to hear that. Who's writing this? Yeah, I can't wait for Tisha B'Av to be over also. I agree. Tears of guilt. There's another one. Well, I teach converts online from all over the world, and I'm grateful to God for that work. It is extremely inspiring. Ariel signed up for an exorcism and spirituality class. We'll try to rejoin you later next week. Well, Ariel, I don't know who you're getting your exorcism class from, but I would be very careful. It's not a joke. And if you're doing it with people who are not in holiness, listen to me closely, Ariel. I hope you're there. If you're not there, someone who knows him, call him. If you're learning these things from the wrong people, you can get touched in a very bad way. It's not a joke. I know people that have done this type of thing, and they can get damaged very easily. Oh, I wish I'd seen that earlier. Okay. You can cry over an ad. But like Folgers coffee, Rhonda? I'm being facetious. Listen, being sensitive is a gift, but it has a price.
Or the Mormon ads, they used to be very touching.
Those are pretty good. I was in Salt Lake for a little while. I found Mormons to be very pleasant people, actually. This was back in the 80s. I don't know if they're still that pleasant, but I wasn't particularly religious Jew, so I don't think I was pushing any buttons. Oh, it was Miriam. Oh, Miriam, I'm so sorry to hear that you... we should cry for all the world that they discover the true God. As far as conversion goes, I don't think that's our program, because only certain souls are lined up to convert, so to speak. And thank God you have converted, I assume, by now. there is a law about a convert not keeping Shabbat, but that could be simple as turning on a light. You don't have to not keep all the laws. If you're a serious convert, you want to learn the laws of Shabbat and you want to keep them. But you're supposed to do something to break the law in order that you're not going against the rabbi's decision that a convert that keeps the law is in spiritual, keeps the Shabbat is in serious trouble. And that has a lot of that has to do with because of the it's getting late. That has to do with the plagiarism and the masquerade of people that aren't Jewish, that act Jewish and dress Jewish and talk Jewish, and they I mean, two of them were run out of Israel recently because this one guy, or he was a rabbi. He was a rabbi. He married people. He wasn't Jewish. He looked Jewish. He wore the clothes. He had the beard, and he was a moil. He learned how to be a moil, to do Brit Milah. All those people that he worked on have issues, serious things to fix. So the rabbis are very sensitive, upset with that kind of thing, and therefore we want people who are in conversion to actually show that they're not there yet, and by doing something like that, like breaking Shabbat, so that there's clarity of your status, so that we're not fooled. Some Jewish guy's going to come along and fall in love with you and you haven't converted yet. It's a big problem. Okay. Now, the people that want to convert and can't, I've dealt with that many, many times. And nowadays, there are ways to convert that I'm not going to talk about here in a public forum. If anybody wants to contact me, they can and write me again at my Gmail, and I will field questions there about that, because there are ways. Not, first of all, the actual going to the mikveh, that's after a great deal of time and learning. That needs to take place no matter what. But I suppose the difficult part is a lot of people live far from a Jewish community and far from a base din, a rabbinical court, and one of the requirements for a convert is they spend a year living in a Jewish community to really learn the life cycle, the yearly cycle of the Jewish calendar. So to do that, you really have to learn. Excuse me. You have to spend time with Orthodox Jews to learn all that. But it's hard. People live out in the middle of nowhere. But like I said, if there are personal questions, I can field those privately. But it is a tremendous amount of mesirat nefesh, self-sacrifice, to convert, especially nowadays with the anti-Semitism that's on the rise. It's not a pleasant thing at all. Thank you, Rena, and thank all of you for being there. You should have a great Shabbat. And it's a challenge on Shabbat not to think about Tisha B'Av, and that is a good challenge, because Shabbat is kept the Jewish people. Tisha B'Av will one day be a holiday, but Shabbat will never leave us, and so we need to be happy on Shabbat. And when the sun goes down, we do what we have to do. So I bless you all with the strength and the power to feel the joy of Shabbat and the morning of Tisha B'Av. And Sunday night, you'll come out of that stronger and better and clearer, ready to go back and do it again. Come back to Hashem, new and renewed. God bless you all. And we'll be in touch in a few weeks, whenever, I guess, I'm not sure the dates. I think it's the middle of Elul, those next two classes. All the best to all of you.
Amen. Good Shabbos. Easy and meaningful fast.